Let's bring in tonight's Political Insiders panel. Joining me, as always, the GFXO Strategies Director, former Chief of Staff for Bill Shorten, Cameron Milner, and DPG Advisory Solutions, former advisor for John Howard, David Gazard. Welcome to you both. Well, Cameron, you've made the news this week big time, and I want to start with your piece in the News Corp papers today about the Prime Minister's inability to lead. I mean, you say under pressure, I'd say to lead full stop, but you actually compare his frazzled response about the negative gearing saga to how Jim Chalmers responded. And you write that Albanese is infamously never across the detail, while his treasurer is never caught out on the detail. And you say the only time Chalmers looks the least bit ruffled is when he's having to take the hits for his hapless leader. Cameron, can you explain your thesis further to us tonight, and whether you do think that this negative gearing debacle was a well-timed political hit?
Well, I think it was, and I wrote about it in today's paper, because the timing was perfect. His human shields were overseas, being Richard Marles and Penny Wong, and Albo had to take all the questions and all the heat for 48 hours, and it was terrible. Like, he melted in front of our eyes. It was disaster on Peter Stefanovic. The guy lied and slid and slided, and then he had to go at the journalists for asking hard questions. No, he was terrible last week, whereas by contrast, Jim Chalmers was in China doing a deal to save our economy. He was in China raising serious issues about the Chinese military, engaging it with our RAF jets, and putting an ICBM missile across the Pacific. He was doing what leaders do, Sharri, and showing up the Prime Minister by absolute contrast. So while Chalmers delivered, Albanese dithered.
Look, if it was a drop, David Gazard, look, it would seem pretty stupid political strategy, because it came out on the same day that the Treasurer was proudly announcing that CPI, that inflation, had fallen to 2.7%. It was a good news day, rare for this government.
Yeah, although I wouldn't see inflation as a particularly good story for this government. The RBA has contradicted the government on that, and interest rates are staying high. If you wanted to set off some hares and fly some kites, it was the perfect time to do it, as Cameron had suggested. I think it does highlight the fact that, and I think if you caught him over a beer, Anthony Albanese would be the first one to say that economic policy really doesn't interest him. It never has. He doesn't take an active role in ERC. I had the privilege and pleasure of working for both Peter Costello and John Howard. They would never have been caught out on an issue like that, because they both understood housing policy, they both understood economic policy, and could have taken the questions. And I don't think either of them would have been crazy enough to take on a policy that affects 30% of all homeowners in the first place. But Anthony Albanese did look very uncomfortable dealing with it. It's the end, coming to the end of the first term, and there's already outbreaks where there's a frustrated Prime Minister referring questions onto the Treasurer, who's in the air. So demanding that people ask Jim Chalmers the tough questions, which he obviously struggled with.
Cameron, you clearly, and you've spoken about it on the show, you don't think the Prime Minister's up to the job. I don't either. But do you think there is a growing sense within Labor that perhaps someone else could do a better job, and that they might need to consider someone else ahead of the next election?
Well, I think Albanese has given his very best. He's just not good enough. That's all. His very best is actually not good enough for Labor Party or to lead us to a majority again. This bloke is going to struggle to govern with the Greens and the Teals. That's his plan to remain PM. So Labor's got a desperate situation here. The best that Albo can do is minority government, and a disaster as well. The best he can do is fumble his way through lines and lie to voters in the middle of a non-campaign week, let alone what the campaign would be like. So Labor is desperately frustrated and worried that this guy's just not up to the job. And you've got people like Jim Chalmers who are on the job all the time, who are capable. And so it's not like Labor hasn't got options. And Chalmers, I think, is the most obvious choice for Labor. And can I say, Sharri, it only requires caucus to vote 50+1, set aside the Rudd rules and vote a new system in for choosing the next Prime Minister of Australia. So it's a very simple thing for Labor caucus to do.
Yeah, well, we'll keep reporting on this and following it. Now, I want to go to an exclusive I've got tonight. I played you parts of Benjamin Netanyahu's powerful speech at the United Nations earlier. Well, I can reveal that Foreign Minister Penny Wong didn't bother to sit in for that address. Now, her office tells me that instead she was attending the Pacific Islands Forum meeting with the United Nations Secretary General during Netanyahu's statement. They say that Australia is a founding member of the Pacific Islands Forum. And can you believe this? They say Australia was represented in the General Assembly by Senator David Fawcett. Well, what a surprise, not a Labor figure. David Gazard, what do you think of this snub by Penny Wong? She met the Palestinian leadership while she was over there, the Palestinian Prime Minister. She posted about it on social media. Can't even sit to listen to what Netanyahu had to say when she's constantly criticising Israel.
Well, it's deeply concerning, and it probably is just a solid display of the moral leadership that we've had that has led to protests over the weekend where people are openly mourning a terrorist leader and sympathiser, butcher of people across the Middle East. I mean, this is a terrible development for our country. I would have thought that the conflagration, if you can call it that, in the Middle East, it's more serious than that, would so overwhelm anything that was happening in the Pacific Islands that our foreign minister would feel duty bound to be there. I mean, this is a dispute that's occupying the Quad. It's occupying the G7. It's of serious import, and it's in stark contrast to Australia's position in the past, where the United States was attacked by terrorists. And we responded by going to war against Iraq. So I just can't believe the position we've got ourselves in, and it's now openly displaying itself on the streets of Sydney over the weekend with people mourning a terrorist leader. I mean, it's shocking.
Horrifying. Very quickly before you go, Cameron, what do you think of Penny Wong's snub?
Well, it was a snub, let's call it for that. And she hasn't wanted to hear the truth. Ever since October 7, she hasn't wanted to hear the truth. But Penny's been to Israel and went and caught up with Palestinian friends. She proselytised on Palestine 2 days before Netanyahu and the UN. So she should have stayed and listened. She should have actually learned why Israel needs self-defence, why Israel is actually fighting terrorism, while back in Australia we're giving succour to terrorists in Australia with, as you quite rightly say, absolutely disgusting displays of support for Hezbollah and Hamas previously in Australia. And that's happening on Penny Wong's watch. So what an awful snub and what a disgrace.
Yeah, indeed. And that the only member of the Australian delegation, according to her, the statement from her office, was a Liberal backbencher. Just appalling. All right, Cameron Milner, David Gazard, love having you on the show. Thank you very much.